Deep in the council chambers of the Valorian Empire, war drums echoed through crystalline walls while Admiral Kresh studied holographic star maps that flickered with conquest opportunities. His massive frame towered over subordinate officers, who whispered nervously about the forbidden sectors marked in ominous red across their navigation charts. For 300 years, galactic law had declared one simple rule that every spacefaring civilization understood perfectly: stay away from Terran space or face consequences beyond imagination. Ancient warning beacons broadcasted their messages in 17 languages, each translation more terrifying than the last, speaking of death and extinction for those foolish enough to ignore the boundaries. The Galactic Council had placed these restrictions after mysterious events that older species refused to discuss openly, preferring to change the subject whenever younger civilizations asked too many questions about the small blue world and its surrounding systems. Even the most aggressive warrior races would grow silent when someone mentioned the Forbidden Zone, their eyes distant with something that looked suspiciously like fear. Admiral Kresh possessed 4 eyes that gleamed with golden ambition while he dismissed such warnings as cowardly superstition from inferior species who lacked the military strength of his great empire. His war fleet contained exactly 200 vessels, each one a masterpiece of Valorian engineering that could punch holes through small moons with concentrated plasma. Fire Commander Vale approached the tactical station where sensor displays showed energy readings from the mysterious human territories, and what she discovered made her secondary heart skip several beats in confusion. The primitive settlements barely registered on their advanced detection equipment, showing technology levels that seemed laughably outdated compared to modern galactic standards. Admiral, something seems wrong about these readings, Commander Vale reported while double-checking her instruments for possible malfunctions. The human colonies show minimal energy output, almost like they are using Stone Age technology or deliberately hiding their true capabilities somehow. Kresh laughed with the confidence of someone who had personally overseen the conquest of 47 different star systems over the past decade of expansion. His empire's territory stretched across multiple spiral arms, and every species they had encountered either surrendered quickly or faced complete annihilation without mercy. The massive fleet began moving toward the forbidden boundary markers while long-range scanners probed ahead for any signs of significant military resistance or defensive preparations. What they found instead were scattered space stations that looked more like research facilities than military installations, plus some mining operations on various asteroids and moons hidden beneath layers of sophisticated deception. Quantum sensors throughout the human solar system detected the approaching Valorian armada and immediately began transmitting encrypted data to command centers that existed in dimensions beyond normal space-time. Every human civilian that the invaders observed through their telescopes was actually a highly trained soldier, wearing elaborate disguises. The peaceful mining stations contained weapon systems that could manipulate matter at the subatomic level, while research facilities housed technology that treated the laws of physics more like gentle suggestions than absolute rules. Earth itself pulsed with energy patterns that would have terrified the Valorians if their sensors were capable of detecting anything beyond 3-dimensional space. As the invasion fleet crossed the ancient warning markers, automated systems throughout Terran space awakened from centuries of patient hibernation. The humans had used their isolation period wisely, advancing their civilization far beyond anything the galaxy could imagine or prepare to face in open combat. Admiral Kresh received a single transmission as his ships approached the inner system, a message delivered in perfect Valorian language despite the fact that no official contact had ever existed between their species. The words were simple and carried an undertone of genuine sadness rather than anger or fear. This is your final opportunity to reverse course and return to your own territory. The transmission stated with quiet authority, "We strongly advise against proceeding further into Terran space, as the consequences will be permanent and irreversible for your entire civilization." The Admiral's mandibles clicked with amusement while he studied the primitive-looking vessels that emerged from Earth's atmosphere to deliver this laughable ultimatum. 3 small ships rose to meet his massive armada, each one roughly the size of a standard fighter craft and apparently lacking any visible weapon systems or defensive shielding. "Prepare for immediate planetary bombardment," Kresh ordered while his tactical officers locked targeting systems onto major human population centers. These primitives will learn what happens when inferior species defy the Valorian Empire's rightful expansion across the galaxy. But something, deep in his warrior's instincts, whispered warnings that he chose to ignore. The same survival mechanisms that had kept his ancestors alive through countless battles now screaming danger signals that made no logical sense. The humans seemed too calm, too confident for a species facing complete extinction from overwhelming military force. His bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency while preparing for what should have been a simple conquest operation against technologically backward opponents. Weapon systems charged to full power, shields activated to maximum strength, and communication arrays prepared to broadcast surrender demands to the doomed human settlements below. What none of them realized was that Earth had been carefully preparing for this exact scenario for over 3 centuries, using their enforced isolation to evolve beyond the physical limitations that constrained other galactic civilizations. The warnings had been placed not to protect humans from invasion, but to protect potential invaders from encountering something their minds could not comprehend. The blue-green world hanging peacefully in space was no longer just a planet inhabited by humans. It had become something far more complex and dangerous. Every atom, every quantum particle, every dimension of space-time in the solar system had been integrated into a vast network of consciousness that existed simultaneously across multiple realities. As Admiral Kresh's fleet moved into attack formation, those 3 small human vessels began what appeared to be a tactical retreat toward the inner system. The Valorians pursued with growing confidence, completely unaware that they were being drawn deeper into a carefully prepared trap that had been centuries in the making. The first hint of trouble came when their long-range sensors started giving impossible readings from the asteroid belt ahead. Empty space suddenly showed massive energy signatures that appeared and disappeared faster than their computers could process the information. "Sir, our instruments are malfunctioning," the science officer reported with growing concern. "The asteroids keep showing as both occupied and empty simultaneously, like our sensors cannot decide which reading is correct." But there was no malfunction. The humans had simply learned to exist in quantum superposition, occupying multiple states of reality, until they chose to collapse into whatever configuration best served their current needs. The Valorian fleet was about to discover what happened when evolution refused to be limited by conventional physics. Behind them, the warning beacons continued broadcasting their ancient messages to empty space, their purpose finally fulfilled. After 3 centuries of patient waiting, soon the galaxy would understand why some territories were marked as permanently forbidden to all who valued their continued existence. Quantum fluctuations rippled through space-time as the 3 human vessels approached the Valorian armada, with movements that defied every known law of physics. The small craft moved in perfect synchronization while existing in multiple dimensions, simultaneously, their hulls shifting between solid matter and pure energy depending on immediate tactical requirements. Admiral Kresh watched from his command throne while tactical displays struggled to maintain locks on targets that kept phasing in and out of conventional reality. His bridge crew exchanged worried glances as their most advanced sensors provided readings that made absolutely no sense, according to their understanding of how the universe operated. "Sir, they are requesting direct communication," Commander Vale announced while her 4 hands danced across control panels that sparked with feedback from systems pushed beyond their design parameters. "The transmission is coming through our most secure channels despite having no access codes." The main viewing screen flickered to life with an image that would haunt Valorian nightmares for generations to come. Captain Ross of the Terran Defense Corps appeared with calm brown eyes that seemed to look directly into the souls of everyone watching. Her simple uniform somehow more intimidating than full military armor. Her voice carried harmonic frequencies that existed in dimensions beyond normal hearing, creating an effect that made every Valorian on the bridge feel like reality itself was speaking to them through this one human representative. The words she spoke were delivered in flawless Valorian despite the fact that their species had never made official contact. "I am Captain Ross," she said with the patience of someone who had practiced this conversation countless times. "You have violated galactic law by entering restricted space and now face consequences that extend far beyond your current understanding of cause and effect." Admiral Kresh's mandibles clicked with aggressive amusement while he leaned forward in his command. chair to address this insignificant creature who dared threaten his mighty warfleet. Behind him, tactical officers counted weapon systems and calculated firing solutions against targets that kept shifting between different states of existence. "I am Admiral Kresh of the Valorian Empire," he declared, with the absolute confidence of someone who had conquered dozens of star systems through superior firepower and ruthless tactics. "Your pathetic world will surrender immediately, or we will reduce every human settlement to radioactive ash within the next solar hour." Captain Ross displayed no fear or anger at this ultimatum, instead showing something that looked disturbingly like pity for opponents who had no idea what they had stumbled into. Her image remained perfectly stable despite the quantum interference that was causing havoc with every other system on the Valorian command ship. "Very well then," she said with genuine sadness in her voice. "Please remember that we offered you multiple opportunities to avoid this outcome, and your government chose to ignore centuries of clear warnings about entering forbidden territory." The transmission ended abruptly, while the three human ships began what appeared to be a hasty retreat. Back toward the inner solar system, Kresh ordered immediate pursuit with overwhelming force, confident that his numerical advantage would crush any resistance before it could properly organize for effective defense. His vanguard units raced forward through the asteroid belt where long-range scans had shown nothing but empty space and floating debris. The Valorian commanders expected easy passage through what looked like a typical mining region, with scattered rocks and abandoned equipment left by primitive human operations. The surprise was absolute and devastating when every seemingly empty asteroid suddenly erupted with weapons fire that tore through advanced Valorian shielding like tissue paper. Hidden installations that had been completely invisible to their sensors unleashed torrents of exotic energy that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "Impossible reading, sir," the tactical officer shouted over alarms that screamed warnings about massive hull breaches throughout the advancing fleet. "Those asteroids still show as empty space, but they are firing weapons that our shields cannot deflect or absorb." 20. Valorian warships simply ceased to exist in the opening seconds of combat, not destroyed by conventional explosions, but edited out of reality by weapons that attacked the fundamental structure of matter itself. The survivors scattered in panic while trying to understand how they were being attacked by installations that their instruments insisted did not exist. Admiral Kresh roared orders for immediate regrouping, while damage reports flooded his communication systems with news of complete destruction among his most advanced vessels. The asteroid belt had become a killing field where every piece of floating debris concealed weapons, platforms that fired with impossible precision. Commander Vale's face had gone pale with shock as she processed sensor data that defied every principle of military science they had learned during decades of successful conquest campaigns. Her instruments showed empty space where devastating attacks were obviously originating, creating a cognitive disconnect that threatened her sanity. "Admiral, we cannot target what we cannot detect," she reported with growing panic. "Our weapons systems refuse to lock onto installations that register as vacuum, but are clearly firing at us with technology beyond our current scientific understanding." The three human ships that had seemed to retreat suddenly reappeared behind the scattered Valorian formation, having somehow traveled through folded space-time to achieve impossible positioning. They moved with fluid grace that made them appear more like living creatures than mechanical constructs built from metal and circuitry. Each human vessel phased through Valorian shields as if they were mere illusions while striking with surgical precision at critical systems throughout the enemy fleet. Command centers, weapon arrays, and life support systems suffered catastrophic failures from attacks that seemed to originate from within the ships themselves. "Sir, they are not using conventional weapons technology," the science officer announced, with terror in his voice. "Energy readings suggest some form of exotic matter manipulation that treats our defensive systems as temporary obstacles rather than permanent barriers." Kresh watched in growing horror as one of the human ships literally materialized inside his flagship's main hangar bay, existing simultaneously in normal space and some other dimension that allowed it to bypass every security measure. The vessel emerged just long enough to destroy crucial computer systems before phasing back into whatever reality it called home. But the real nightmare began when Captain Ross's voice suddenly filled the communication channels of every surviving Valorian ship throughout the scattered fleet. Her words reached them despite encrypted frequencies and isolated systems that should have been impossible for outsiders to access. The galactic community placed those warning markers around our territory for excellent reasons, she explained, with the same patient tone a teacher might use when correcting a stubborn child. Humans are not just another spacefaring species competing for resources and territory. More contacts appeared on tactical displays as hundreds of additional vessels emerged from what had seemed like completely empty space. Ships materialized from higher dimensions, from folded probability fields, from quantum states that should not have been able to support organized matter under any known scientific principles. We are what happens when evolution refuses to accept the limitations of conventional physics, Captain Ross continued while reality itself seemed to bend around her words. During our centuries of isolation, we transcended the boundaries that constrain other civilizations to single-dimensional existence. The Valorian fleet found itself trapped within a sphere of twisted space-time that prevented retreat, while making forward movement equally impossible. Every escape route had been anticipated and blocked by enemies who existed partially outside normal causality, and therefore could prepare for events before they actually occurred. Admiral Kresh finally understood the true meaning of the ancient warnings that had kept the galaxy away from Terran space for 300 years. The humans had not been hiding from potential invaders. They had been protecting the galaxy from accidentally encountering forces that transcended mortal comprehension. His empire's most advanced technology was utterly helpless against opponents who treated the laws of physics as suggestions rather than absolute limits. The conquest that should have taken hours was becoming a demonstration of how quickly superior civilizations could face complete annihilation. Reality twisted around the Valorian fleet as human vessels demonstrated capabilities that challenged every assumption about what was possible in a universe governed by consistent physical laws. The three small ships moved through space like dancers, performing an ancient ritual, their movements creating ripples in dimensions that most species could not even perceive. What followed would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries, assuming anyone survived to establish such institutions after witnessing combat that redefined the very concept of warfare. Each human craft existed in a state of quantum superposition that allowed them to be simultaneously present and absent, depending on their immediate tactical requirements. Admiral Kresh gripped his command throne while watching displays that showed his mighty armada being systematically dismantled by opponents who seemed to exist everywhere and nowhere at once. Weapons fire passed harmlessly through human ships that had shifted into alternate dimensional phases, while return strikes materialized from impossible angles. They are not bound by conventional matter, his science officer reported with growing hysteria. Our sensors detect them in multiple locations simultaneously, as if each ship exists as probability clouds that collapse into specific positions only when they choose to attack. The Valorian advantage in numbers became meaningless when, facing enemies who could ignore the basic rules that governed space combat throughout the known galaxy, human vessels phased through solid barriers, emerged from within heavily shielded compartments, and struck at targets from directions that should have been physically impossible. Commander Vale watched in fascination and terror as exotic matter. Manipulation allowed human weapons to reach through multiple dimensions before manifesting their destructive effects inside Valorian ships. Hull armor that could withstand direct hits from stellar-class weapons offered no protection against attacks that originated from within the vessels themselves. "Sir, they are bypassing our shields entirely," she announced while tactical displays showed impossible energy patterns flowing through their defensive systems. The humans appear to be editing our ships at the quantum level, rather than using conventional destructive methods. One of the human vessels performed a maneuver that defied every known principle of physics by folding space around itself until it occupied the same coordinates as a Valorian destroyer. For several seconds, both ships existed in the same location simultaneously before the enemy craft separated, leaving behind a perfectly intact human vessel and scattered debris where their warship used to be. The systematic destruction was almost artistic in its precision as human forces demonstrated complete mastery over fundamental forces that Valorian science barely understood. Ships that had conquered star systems found themselves helpless against opponents who treated concepts like causality and conservation of energy as optional guidelines. They are learning our technology faster than we can deploy it, the tactical officer reported with despair in his voice. Every system they scan gets immediately analyzed and countered, as if they can understand our engineering principles just by looking at them. But the true horror began when corridors throughout the Valorian fleet filled with an impossible mist that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. The substance analyzed everything it touched while remaining completely immune to conventional weapons or defensive countermeasures designed to repel boarding actions. Crew members reported seeing human soldiers walking through solid metal walls, as if they were made of nothing more substantial than colored light. The intruders moved with purpose and precision, while collecting information from computer systems that should have been completely inaccessible to outside interference. "Sir, they are downloading our entire database," the communications officer whispered with terror. "Technical specifications, strategic plans, personal records, everything we know is being copied and transmitted to their vessels through quantum entanglement channels." Admiral Kresh realized that the humans were not trying to kill his people quickly or efficiently, but instead were harvesting every piece of information they could extract from Valorian minds and technology. The invasion had become a comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation that would leave no secrets unexplored. Several Valorian vessels attempted desperate escape maneuvers, only to discover that the humans had somehow anticipated their retreat routes with impossible accuracy. Space itself seemed to bend around fleeing ships, drawing them back toward Earth's gravitational influence like insects caught in an invisible web of folded dimensions. "The enemy is receiving data streams from our destroyed vessels," his communications officer reported with barely controlled panic. "They appear to be preserving the consciousness patterns of our crews before allowing the ships to be completely destroyed." The admiral felt his blood freeze as he understood the full implications of what his science officer had discovered. The humans were not simply killing Valorian personnel. They were downloading their minds, preserving every memory and piece of knowledge for detailed analysis and study. Through the observation ports, Earth hung in space with deceptive beauty, while its blue-green surface concealed the true nature of what they were facing. The planet was no longer just inhabited by humans. It had become a single vast organism that existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Ancient warning beacons had tried to protect the galaxy from encountering something that existed beyond conventional reality, but the Valorian Empire had dismissed such precautions as primitive superstition. Now they faced the consequences of awakening forces that transcended mortal understanding of life and death. All remaining ships, Kresh broadcast on emergency frequencies while watching another vessel simply fade out of existence. Transmit immediate warnings to High Command about the true nature of Terran space and its inhabitants. But his warning would arrive too late to save the Empire from consequences that had been set in motion the moment they crossed the forbidden boundary markers. The humans had already extracted the locations of every Valorian colony from their captives' memories, and were preparing to extend their influence far beyond the solar system. The fleet that had entered Terran space with dreams of conquest now faced complete annihilation from beings who had transcended the physical limitations that constrained other galactic civilizations. Every ship contained crew members who were slowly coming to understand that they had not encountered another species. They had stumbled into the territory of something that existed beyond the conventional definitions of life itself. Captain Ross's voice reached them one final time through communication channels that should have been impossible to access. "Your empire chose to ignore warnings that were placed for the protection of all galactic life. Now you will serve as an example of what happens when aggressive species refuse to respect clearly established boundaries." The remaining Valorian vessels found themselves completely surrounded by human forces that existed in quantum superposition until they chose to manifest in whatever configuration would be most effective for their immediate purposes. Escape was impossible, surrender was not being offered, and conventional warfare had proven utterly inadequate against opponents who treated reality itself as a weapon. Dimensional barriers shattered around Admiral Kresh's flagship as human forces began the systematic harvesting of everything that made the Valorian Empire a functioning civilization. The Dominator survived longer than other vessels, not because of superior defenses, But because the humans were conducting detailed studies of Valorian technology and biology, strange energy patterns flowed through corridors that had been sealed against hostile boarding actions. Yet these new intruders passed through solid metal like it was nothing more than empty air. Crew members reported impossible sightings of human soldiers who appeared solid enough to manipulate equipment while remaining completely immune to weapons fire. "They are not trying to kill us quickly," Commander Vale observed while watching security footage of humans who walked through locked doors without opening them. "These beings seem more interested in learning everything about our species than in causing immediate casualties." The mist that had invaded their ships proved to be some form of quantum analysis system that could understand any technology just by coming into contact with it. Every circuit, every data storage device, every piece of military intelligence was being scanned and copied by forces that existed partially outside normal space-time. Admiral Kresh felt his warrior's pride crumble as he realized that his people had become nothing more than laboratory specimens for creatures whose capabilities transcended everything he thought he knew about the universe. The humans were treating them with the same clinical detachment that Valorian scientists showed when studying primitive microorganisms. "Sir, we are detecting consciousness transfer events throughout the fleet," the science officer reported with growing horror. "They appear to be downloading the complete mental patterns of our personnel before allowing their physical forms to expire naturally." The few Valorian ships that attempted escape maneuvers discovered that the humans had spent centuries preparing for exactly this scenario. Every possible retreat route had been anticipated and blocked by forces that could manipulate space-time itself to create inescapable gravitational Wells quantum sensors that existed in multiple dimensions, simultaneously tracked fleeing vessels. While probability calculators determined their most likely destinations with perfect accuracy, the humans had learned to think in terms of infinite possibility rather than linear causality, making conventional military tactics completely obsolete. "Communications from the Defiant, sir," the tactical officer announced. "They report that space around their vessel is physically contracting, drawing them back toward Earth despite running their engines at maximum power." But perhaps most terrifying was the gradual realization that individual human soldiers were not separate beings but extensions of a single vast intelligence that encompassed the entire solar system. Earth itself had become conscious during the centuries of isolation, transforming from a simple planet into something that existed across multiple realities. The blue-green world that hung peacefully in their viewports was no longer just inhabited by humans. It was a single organism of unimaginable complexity that had integrated every atom of matter in the surrounding space into its extended nervous system. The warnings had not been about entering dangerous territory, but about disturbing something that preferred to remain hidden. "All vessels report the same phenomenon," Commander Vale announced with despair. "The humans are not fighting us with ships and weapons. They are using reality itself as a tool for containing and studying our forces." Admiral Kresh watched tactical displays that showed his remaining fleet trapped within bubbles of twisted space-time that prevented any movement beyond what their captors chose to allow. The humans could have destroyed every Valorian ship instantly, but instead were conducting the most comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation in galactic history. "Sir, incoming transmission from Valorian High Command," the communications officer reported. "They are demanding status updates and estimated time until conquest completion." The admiral laughed bitterly while composing what he knew would be his final report to the empire that had sent him to conquer what they believed was a primitive human civilization. How could he explain that they had encountered something that existed beyond the conventional definitions of life, intelligence, and physical reality? "Tell them that the Valorian Empire is about to face consequences for ignoring 3 centuries of warnings about forbidden territory," he ordered while watching human ships that phased in and out of visible existence. "And tell them that everything we know about warfare, technology, and survival is about to become completely irrelevant." Through quantum entanglement channels that bypassed conventional communication methods, the humans were already accessing Valorian databases throughout their home territory. Every military secret, every technological advancement, every strategic plan was being analyzed by intelligence networks that existed in dimensions beyond physical space. The consciousness patterns they had harvested from destroyed vessels were being used to create perfect simulations of Valorian society, allowing the humans to predict every possible response their empire might attempt. Centuries of isolation had been spent preparing for this exact scenario with methodical precision. "Sir, we are receiving reports from our colonies," the communications officer announced with growing panic. "Multiple star systems are reporting impossible phenomena. Ships that move between dimensions, weapons that fire backwards through time, soldiers who exist in quantum superposition." The Valorian Empire was not just losing a single battle, but facing systematic transformation by forces that had transcended the physical limitations constraining other galactic civilizations. Every world, every space station, every military installation was being simultaneously analyzed and modified according to human specifications. Admiral Kresh realized that his invasion fleet had not stumbled into a trap, but had triggered the activation of something that had been dormant for 300 years. The humans had used their enforced isolation to evolve beyond conventional existence, becoming something that treated entire star empires as garden projects requiring careful management. "The humans are not conquering us," he whispered while watching. His flagship's systems gradually shut down under the influence of quantum fields that existed in multiple realities. "They are rehabilitating us according to their vision of what galactic civilization should become." But there was no time left for regrets about ignored warnings or underestimated opponents. The Valorian Empire was about to discover what happened when an aggressive species encountered beings who had learned to edit reality itself according to their preferences for peace and cooperation. The hunt was just beginning, and every Valorian world would soon understand why certain territories had been marked as permanently forbidden to all who valued their independence and cultural identity. 3 months after Admiral Kresh's final transmission disappeared into quantum static, Valorian High Command received confirmation that their greatest fears about Terran space had been completely justified. The message consisted of a single holographic image showing Earth transformed into something that defied every known principle of planetary science. The blue-green world now pulsed with veins of pure energy that extended through space itself, like a vast neural network connecting every star system within 100 light-years. The planet had shed all pretense of being a normal celestial body, revealing its true nature as a dimensional nexus point that existed simultaneously across multiple realities. But the humans did not limit their response to the destruction of a single invasion fleet. Within days, Valorian colonies throughout the Outer Rim began reporting phenomena that challenged the sanity of everyone who witnessed them. Ships materialized from folded space-time, weapons discharged energy backwards through temporal dimensions, and soldiers existed in quantum superposition until combat required them to collapse into specific realities. The Valorian Empire, master of 47 star systems and conqueror of dozens of intelligent species, fell completely within 18 standard days. Not through conventional warfare or overwhelming military force, but through systematic transformation that edited their civilization at the most fundamental levels of existence. Human forces did not simply occupy Valorian territory. They began what they called rehabilitation, a process that involved altering the basic nature of an entire species rather than merely changing their government or military capabilities. Aggressive tendencies were identified and removed at the genetic level, while memories of conquest and domination were carefully extracted and replaced with instinctive horror of violence. The few Valorian survivors who retained their original personalities were preserved as living museums, kept in a state of constant awareness so they could serve as warnings for future generations. They were forced to watch their descendants transform into peaceful agricultural communities that would never know their ancestors had once been feared across the galaxy. General Stone of the Terran Rehabilitation Corps stood in the observation deck of a station that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously, while monitoring the transformation of what had once been the Valorian homeworld. Her uniform bore no insignia of rank because such concepts had become obsolete for beings who existed beyond conventional hierarchies. Status report on the Valorian integration project, she requested from subordinates who communicated through quantum entanglement rather than spoken language. The response came directly into her consciousness through neural channels that connected all human minds across multiple realities. Genetic modification, 97% complete. Memory restructuring proceeding ahead of schedule. Violent tendencies successfully eliminated from the breeding population. Similar transformations were occurring throughout the galaxy as other aggressive species discovered that humanity's emergence from isolation marked the beginning of a new era for all galactic civilizations. Every warlike culture found their nature gently but irreversibly altered, their capacity for violence edited away like unwanted code in a cosmic program. The draconian hegemony lasted 6 days before their warrior culture was replaced with an obsessive interest in artistic expression. The insectoid swarms took 11 days to transform from hive-minded conquerors into individual philosophers who spent their time contemplating the beauty of existence. The Galactic Council members, who had tried to maintain warnings around Terran space, were permitted to continue existing, but only as caretakers of the new order that humanity was implementing across known space. Their previous governmental structure was preserved as a useful administrative tool for managing species that had not yet completed their rehabilitation. President Chen of the Reformed Galactic Council reviewed daily reports about peaceful trade, negotiations between formerly hostile civilizations that could no longer comprehend why they had ever considered warfare as a solution to disagreements. Her office existed in a space station that phased between dimensions depending on administrative requirements. The transformation is proceeding exactly as the human planners predicted, she announced to council members whose species had all undergone varying degrees of modification. Galactic civilization is finally achieving the stability that has been our goal for millennia. But the most significant change was the installation of monitoring stations throughout what had once been Valorian territory. These facilities served not to detect incoming threats but to ensure that no trace of aggressive patterns ever re-emerged in the descendants of the conquered. The humans had learned during their centuries of isolation that forced evolution could create lasting peace, but only if it was implemented with absolute thoroughness. Every genetic marker associated with violence, every cultural tradition that glorified conquest, every technological development that could be weaponized was carefully identified and eliminated. Captain Ross, now holding a position that transcended military rank and existed as a focal point for human consciousness throughout the galaxy, observed the peaceful interactions between species that had been bitter enemies just months before. The universe had been given a choice between coexistence and extinction. The warnings served their purpose, she noted while reviewing reports from rehabilitation centers across thousands of star systems. But when the galaxy chose to ignore our attempts at isolation, we did what was necessary to ensure that such choices could never be made again. Her ship existed in a state of quantum superposition that allowed her to monitor every inhabited world simultaneously while coordinating the careful management of species that had proven incapable of governing themselves peacefully. The humans had tried isolation, had tried warnings, had tried every peaceful solution. When diplomacy failed and the galaxy insisted on maintaining its cycles of warfare and conquest, humanity had accepted responsibility for creating the peace that other civilizations could not achieve independently. The Forbidden Zone had served its purpose by giving aggressive species 3 centuries of opportunity to evolve beyond violence. Now the entire galaxy was under invisible management by beings who had transcended the need for conventional existence, and who would never again allow the chaos of unguided evolution to threaten the harmony they had died to create. Every world prospered under guidance from forces that existed beyond the physical limitations of normal space-time. The Valorian Empire had defied the warnings and paid the ultimate price, not death or destruction, but transformation into something better than they could have imagined becoming. From their loss, something far more beautiful and sustainable had been born across the stars. Ancient warning beacons around Terran space were updated one final time, with a new message that reflected the changed nature of galactic civilization. Here dwells the species that remade the universe in the image of peace. Do not disturb their garden, for you are already part of it.